Kemo, you mute bang.
Sorry?
I said there's interference music coming from where you are, but I'm just gonna mute you real quick. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you following us from or you're watching us from. It's with me again, Ibrahim Asanko. I am the host of the Dialectic Space podcast. And today I have with me my very good brother, Mr. Kemo Fadi, that I'm going to be talking to. For those of you who may not know who Kemo is, Kemo Fadi is a passionate climate activist turned independent presidential candidate in the Gambia for the 2026 presidential elections. Kemo, with a background rooted in environmental advocacy and grassroots activism, Kemo has long championed sustainable development, accountability, and youth empowerment values he now brings into the political arena. As an independent presidential candidate, he is offering governments a different kind of choice and not tethered to traditional party politics, according to Kemo, but anchored in a vision for ecological resilience, good governance, and generational renewal. In this episode, we'll definitely explore the forces that shape his activism, his vision for the Gambia's future, what motivates him to run independently, and whether his campaign can mobilize the kind of national movement he envisions. So join me and stick around and also leave your questions on the chat if you have any of them for Mr. Kemo Fadi. But again, before we get into the discussion, I would like to encourage all of you, all of our followers and audience, to kindly subscribe to our YouTube channel to support these initiatives that we're trying to do or we continue to do on this platform. Like I always tell you, that the dialectic space is your platform. It belongs to all of us. Yes, I created it, but the idea is to be a conduit for conversation, is to be a conduit for ideas, is to be a conduit for us to dialogue on critical issues that are defining or very important to who we are, not only as Gambians, but people that live in this world. It is in that spirit today that I invite one of the leading voices in terms of climate and environmental activism, not only for the Gambia, but around the African continent. So, Kemo looks like he's trying to get back on. He was on earlier, so we'll just give him a few minutes to see if we're able to get him back on again on the live stream, and then we can crack on with the conversation. But once again, thank you all for being here. Thank you for being part of this chat, and we'll start momentarily. Okay, Kemo is back on. But email mobile okay, do not disturb. If they call non-stop, and we can have a conversation.
I'm trying to put the phone on do not disturb because I realized that in its shot. Okay, now it's on do not disturb.
Yes, thank you very much. So, while you were away, I did a brief introduction of you, and I must also add that I am very honored to talk to you today. Just a little background to most of you. Kemo and I went to same high school, and we did a lot of incredible work together as members of the Peerhood. And Kemo's first appearance on stage on Nusrat Peerhood was with me and few other people, such as Aji Saho, Haruna Biba, Fatmata Sandeng, and we had an incredible team in Nusrat High School that would go on to national level to win incredible accolades for the school. And we've grown a relationship that transcends just school relationship. I consider him a brother, and I also want to begin this conversation by telling him, I've watched your journey very closely, but also from afar since I've left the Gambia, and you're doing such an incredible work, especially in regards to climate activism and environment in the Gambia. So I'm honored to have you here today. Welcome to the Dialectic Space Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Ibrahima. And when I see you, it reminds me of my legendary blunder on stage back in Alliance Franco that did end us getting us the victory. So Aji always gets hot when I say that, but I'm sure it gets us the victory because it saved us time on stage. So yeah, happy to connect you more.
So thank you, Kemo. We had amazing memories together. I think looking
Yeah.
back, I always tell people part of how I am able to do what I do is from the experience that I've had in high school, those extracurricular activities, challenging ourselves every day to get out of our comfort zone, to be in front of students every day and having to dramatize in front of them. It literally shaped us to be who we are. And I hope my experience, as valuable as it has been for me, it's actually same for you as well. But let's begin this conversation with really getting into who Kemo is. You've been quoted saying that you were born from Old Joswang and you were also raised from SOS Children's Village in Bakode. Could you walk us through your childhood, what that looked like, and what your daily life was like as well in Bakode?
Yeah, I think childhood was one of the most exciting times for me. I was born in Old, I was in Old Joswang. I was born in Serekunda Hospital actually, but I didn't know that until the later part of my life. But my parents used to live in Old Joswang. My grandfather was one of the earliest highway there, so we right on there. Old Joswang Dangan was not that far, so we used to have an issue with the Sindele group. They are called the Kasinkos. So because they are the fishermen, so when we go down to the Ndangan area as kids, they try to tell us that they own Ndangan, we shouldn't swim under their boats. So most of my childhood was fighting, to swim under the boats. You have to go from the side of the boat, swim underneath, and go there. So if the boat belongs to one of these Serere kids, you will not be doing that with their boats. And I have to fight like by force. I will have to do that. And they will be like, "Hey, you lay Geo know it, don't challenge these guys in this water." But somehow, it was some of the most. And I was in Old Joswang Primary for grade one. By then, I was just 7 years old. So my father worked in an orphanage called the SOS Children's Villages. So he moved down there when I was going to grade two. And then, I moved from a public school to a private school. SOS was a private school. So this was a highlight of my life where I lived with hundreds of children in one village. So, I mean, it takes about half an hour to hug my own father. You have all the kids shouting, "Mr. Fati, Mr. Fati." So, myself, I end up calling my own father Mr. Fati. I kind of belong to the SOS Children's Village there. And, started to go to SOS lower basic. By then, it was just opening up. I think that was around the year 2000. So, the school was just recently new and we were the first batch. So, I started at grade two, and that was really high class school. We had like each of us used to sit on a table of our own, like two people sit on a table. You have these nice fancy tables where you put in your bags, and then you also have these fans that you pull up. So as a young person who just started school, it was like the best experience. And grade 3, I became the class prefect of the school. So this was the beginning of my leadership journey. And but grade 3, something really happened that really, kind of took my heart away, I would say, because I was sent away for school fees, in the same school and the same institution that my father used to work at. So now my father was so angry that he had to put us in a public school. So I had to go to Bakote proper in grade 3 because, they sent us out during exams. And as a child, when these school fees things come and they send you out, your colleagues are in the classroom, you really get very agitated. So my father took us to a public school, and this was very hard for me to adapt. But I realized that whatever situation, that taught me a life lesson, that whatever situation you are in, you have to improvise, adapt, and overcome. So imagine from those fancy classrooms that you're sitting in, now I'm in Bakote proper, where there are no proper windows. At SOS, we used to have windows that you open and close with glass. So this time in the government school, the windows were like, you see the cement holes, so they just have holes in between for air to pass. And there was no blackboard. The blackboard is the fence itself. So they have to paint the fence black. And believe me, when the teacher is using the chalk on that cement wall with that black painting, the noise that it makes, it tickles my whole body. So I was in a class where from sitting with two people on a bench, I'm now the fourth person sitting on those long benches, which is designed for two people. But because public schools were so overcrowded, there are four of us. So now me and the last person to come. So what we call in Wolof Guy Chatalma. So only half of my mistake will be sitting on the chair. So I'll be at the corner there. But as a child, it only took 1 week for me to adapt, because in that public school there were more varieties of food. So when I go to the market, I see all the things they sell, I become hooked. And then there was always, kind of PE and these games, playing with a lot of students. There are football matches. So because there was a lot of students, I adapted quickly in this private school. And this is where I was until grade 6. And then I went to junior school, Munazamat Al Dawa Al Islamiyah. So this was a path towards, adolescence. And from there on, that was where the whole transformation came. I used to be a very fat kid. So when I went to junior school, I thought I was also still fat, not knowing that I'm no longer fat. So in Munazamat, things were a little bit different. I mean, people were really very faithful people, very religious people. Sometimes there were even elderly people in our class who have graduated from these Arabic schools, and they are there. So I was mixed with a pretty mature level of class. And because of my, activeness in academics, sometimes I'll have to help these people to be able to understand English. So that made me kind of mature a bit faster. I remember one of my friends, Al Husseini, and Talib, they used to be highly intelligent people from this Arabic school. So through this high school, I kind of grow up. I mean, it became like, life became more serious. So my academic journey, I'm never interested in, school stuff. I have to pass exams, of course, because of my father. But at this particular level, I've always believed that, it's just about home. Let me just get a good report card. If I get first or second, I don't mind, so that my parents don't complain. But I wasn't really interested until one day a science teacher came in. Her name was Miss Kamara. So Miss Kamara said that in the school, nobody is going to defeat a girl called Fatuke Suarez. So this is where I got pissed. This girl was a star, super intelligent. She was flogging the whole school with marks beyond where people can even reach. So now when Miss Kamara pinched my ego, I was like, you know what, Miss Kamara, I'm about to defeat this girl. So that's where my academic journey began. I took Miss Kamara's science pamphlet and memorized that whole stuff. So one time I came to the school prepared. By then, mock exams was coming. So after Miss Kamara marked my paper, she came looking for me with my paper. I was like, I told you. And that was the beginning of my academic competitiveness. And then I did the grade 9. So the grade 9, I had aggregate 14, but it was a very peculiar result, because I wasn't that good in mathematics and I wasn't interested in it either at that time. So I think I got 9 in maths and had A in almost all the subjects. So the vice principal, Mr. Koroma, was pissed. He said, you could have got 6, and put the name of our school. I'm like, me, when I was going to the school, I was praying for a cut-off mark of aggregate 30. Let me not pass aggregate 30. And I went there telling me 14, and the vice principal is complaining. I'm like, I don't think you are okay. Me coming here praying for aggregate 30 now so that I can just go to SOS High School. So when I got that 14, my uncle, who's a highly academic guy, he's been the one paying my school fees. So he's like, you have to go and do, commerce. But I don't want to do commerce, it's like, I was in Nusrat High School. We went to Science One, this Jangis thing. Look, after we have closed, after we have left school, there is no jobs. Everybody cannot be a doctor. So you have to understand how to make yourself. So that was my first career lesson. I'm like, but I'm really not interested in this accounting stuff. But if you're paying your money, me, I'm fine, But I wanted to go to SOS High School because I missed that private school vibes. But because of this high grade of results, I had to go to Nusrat High School. And slowly, when I went to Nusrat, I'm always angry at everyone because everyone loved learning so much. Everybody is making themselves this high level Shakespeare people. I'm like, hey, guys, I'm here to, interact and mingle with people. So, but my class, everyone was a calculator. So the only way that I have to keep up with my class is to become a biologist because Commerce 2 was the only commerce class that was doing full-fledged biology. So I always immersed myself into those books that I was Science 1 standard when it comes to biology. So the commerce students were always doubtful of how how I'm able to score these marks in biology. And after that, I graduated high school. That's when we were in the peer health. And
Yes. Before you proceed with that story, I think for those of you who are just joining us, I mentioned earlier that Kemo and I were in the same high school. We all went to Nusrat High School, and that's where our paths crossed. He was my senior, but interestingly, Kemo is right on the money when he said he was. Kemo was different. A lot of students in Nusrat, everybody wants to get A's. Everybody is super obsessed, hyper competitive with books, and the competition was so high that some of us who were still somewhat okay, that it was a different environment for us. So we have to find a way to fit in. I remember one time Mr. Koroma also took my English because most of the people in my crazy, and I've always been
yeah,
really passionate about this language. Mr. Koroma, after one exam, he took my exam papers to all the science classes to tell them that you guys need to meet this person, right? And he
yeah,
sort of went on to different classes to talk to them about me. But just to speak to just how different sometimes it is for some people who are still okay. Like, I don't like to use the word smart, but intelligent, but they are
yeah.
also not obsessed with the idea of a competition. And at this point, I really want to understand, in your perspective, at what level do extracurricular activities, for example, and also the consciousness of being environmentally aware down on you, because I'm pretty sure at some level of your period in your school career, something must have happened that sparked that interest in you, or at least something you have seen, because even peer health was never your thing. I remember the first time we said, Kemo, you need to act, you were very resistant initially. You were like, I've never done this, I don't know how to do this, but if you guys train me, perhaps I should be able to do it. And you ended up doing it. So if you would walk us through that process.
Yeah, so my environmental journey didn't really start in high school. As a matter of fact, in high school, after my uncle had forced me to study commerce, my dream was to become the Wolf of Wall Street. Money was everything. As I was studying commerce, my uncle was telling me ways that when you get ACCA salary levels that you were seeing, I was looking at, some kinds of, I was checking into the stock markets, I would know what the NASDAQ is at that time. I was a serious capitalist back in high school. You don't play with me at those days. I mean, in fact, as a matter of fact, I was the president of the IT club, and
Yes.
usually, Mr. Bojan, that's why I say, you've got to hate corruption. So my first corruption that I did was in high school. We had this competition, and I told Mr. Boja, you remember when we went for drama, Gambia High School comes with a bus full of people. And when we go there, they make so much noise that we don't do. So I need to go with people, knowing fully well that I don't need to go with anyone to win that competition. I just need to appear there because it's at Kotu High School. So I know, okay, with our presentation, I'll just win. So I'll tell Mr. Bojang, I want to go with 60 people. And by then, the IT club was short of funds. So when Mr. Bojang told me to go to the with Bossa because the school bus was spoiled, gets fares for 60 people. Now I told the IT club, let's see how many people are going, and then we keep the rest for the club because otherwise, we will come here and then struggle, and at this competition we don't get anything. So we go and then we win and come. Mr. Bojang never asked us, how many people did you go with? So I'm like, it's a waste because we won already. So what's the point of, taking 60 people just to go and support us? What if we lose? So this is how we were able to kind of maximize our resources at the IT club. But afterwards, when I left Nusrat High School, immediately, I started an internship where I was working as a in a hospital logistics department. So I was just supporting to kind of build a system. Since as a president of IT Club, I am very much proficient with Microsoft Office, so I was helping to build this system with Access, where we have to register all the patients that were coming to this hospital and filling in their data. They had these manual filing systems where they have to look for every patient file that comes in. So I was helping to digitalize these systems, and through this, I got, an employment. They're like, if you would want to stay as you are doing a professional course, you can help with the logistics department and the procurement. So I was really someone who was involved in all of this management. So at this time, I had already grown up, and I was kind of looking forward to independence, because just from high school and then you have a job at an international NGO. So this was high paychecks. I didn't expect those bucks to start rolling in soon. I'm like, people go to university, graduate with a master's for this job, and I've just got this job on a silver plate. So I took it and started my professional journey. My uncle was, paying this ACCA. He's really wanting me to become this professional chartered accountant, which I do not really want. But since he's the one paying, I'm just following his lead back then. I just go make sure I pass my papers. I think I stopped at F9. So, but I wasn't really interested in this. Even some of my colleagues, the way I see that these professionals, they were bankers in our class, they all wanted this paper badly. But me, I'm just there to get this paper so I can have peace with my uncle, and I figure out how to get to Wall Street, and start my life. This was my plan. So I was saving towards going to the United States. And then says, this is where things change. The unthinkable happened. Because my mother, when I was in junior school, my father had resigned from SOS. So I stayed, somewhere else with my father's friend. And this is someone that took care of me and mentored me all through my journey. So my father went back to the village. And at those times, when there's holidays, you always cut down your holiday to go to the village where we were from in Kerawan. My father didn't believe in staying in the metropolitan Gambia. He was a farmer. And even at SOS, where we used to live, our garden used to be a paradise where, the children will always come and steal carrots, potatoes, and sometimes when we harvest, we take the bananas, all of them, and share with the village. So my father was really into agriculture. And when he went back, when I go for holidays, I usually walk with my mother in what we call the furrows. These are the swamps. So this is where we grow rice. So my mother used to get lots of rice from these swamps, which we go. I enjoy the process of harvesting. Before the rice, you grow them. There is what we call jambaro. You remove the weeds from there. And then from there on, when the rice also grows, there's a time you go for karo. You go with a sickle and cut this help. And then you put a barrel there, beat those rice. So that was the greatest fun ever when you go for holidays. So I always wanted to kind of be part of those. But from high school and then getting that job, I haven't been, always into that rice fields because, I'm busy trying to make money and finding my way to the United States because I wanted to be the Wolf of Wall Street. So it's at this point where one time my mother just called and she said, like, she needed support. I was like, what? He's like, Nibina Dukare Sadam Mano Sanya. I was like, but what do you mean Sadam Mano Sanya? I want to lend her money dollar. I was like, what? Aliyah Dahamani Dola? I said, yes. I could not understand what she's trying to explain. So when I was going, I bought this bag of rice. And, it was also with my brother, Lamin. Lamin also, we went together. And then we sat there with this course. So the next day, I went to see those rice fields where we used to grow, why my mom says she stops. So when you say kolebeje, me, in my mind, I don't understand what salt intrusion is. Kole dun tan na farol don. Okay, ngatanga jibe. So I'm like, why don't you guys sell salt then? So I went, but I said, this is a different kind of intrusion, I saw hectares of land covered in white patches. It was like I couldn't recognize where I was. And my dad was like, "Ibe lori na faro la kono teng," before alka jambaro kan ndamento. I looked at the surrounding, I looked at this. This was terrifying, believe me. The scariest part of my life was seeing that I could not recognize a place that used to be filled with water, that used to have all green grasses around. This was a rich area, and now it's just bare white patches of hypersalination. So this is something that I needed to understand what really happened. So during that time, I came back, still going to my work as a, logistic and procurement manager. And my brother, who was also living with me at that time, he told me like, "Look, I see that, now when we just went, you are the one that bought this bag of rice, and me, I'm the elder. It's not really cool that at least you're having this job. I should also try to do something. So I think the best way is that, if you can support me, let me see how best I can make it to, Italy, because a lot of people are entering." I was like, no, I was reluctant at the first phase, but he's like, no, when you went to the Faroes, I even talked with dad about this, he has given me his blessings and all of that. I said, yeah, but this is dangerous. So I had to figure out and mobilize the resources to send my brother to this journey, so that at least we can have a helping hand. So my brother's missing for about 3 months in a desert called Agades. This was the point where, I think Kemo himself became someone different. Every month, I'm the one in touch with my brother. I'm the one sending the money. So when my mother called to ask where my brother is, for 2 weeks I have not spoken to him. I tell him, well, I have just spoken to him now because I cannot trace where he is. He just lost touch, just like that. So after a month as well, my mother will call me again. I'll be like, I always keep lying to her. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We just spoke right now, So the second month now, I started including things like Connection House because I know he was telling me some of his boys, when they make it to Connection House, you cannot make a call back home. So I keep telling my mother that my brother is in Connection House for 3 months. Every day when I go to bed, believe me, Ibrahima, I cannot sleep. I was getting stressed out, on a daily basis. And this is where, for me, things kind of changed to ask, but what is worth this? I sent my brother on a suicide journey. So I swore to myself that my brother is going to be the last Gambian to ever die on this journey. So I was preparing to go and tell my parents that I haven't heard from my brother for 3 months. I remember this was in Ramadan. Man, just as I was going to Banjul, I was buying some Ramadan stuff at this Mauritanian shop, and my brother called me. He was like, "Kemo Banduntale." I sujud my forehead on the ground, and then I was like, okay, now is my time to make sure that nobody ever goes on this journey ever again. When my brother spoke to me and cried and explained to me how he was lost in that desert for more than 3 months, it was the Red Cross in Libya that saved his life. If not, he would have been dead. He also explained to me the journey of this boat. This kind of infuriated me beyond measure, that my brother has to be the last person to ever go on this journey. And this is how I went to an organization called Operation No Back Way to Europe. This was started by Honorable Suleiman Saho, a member of parliament now. So I joined this organization in a bid to kind of stop migration. So this was where my advocacy began. It was not really climate change, it was migration. So we started to kind of talk to people, kind of create a documentary. And later on, there was a global youth summit that was supposed to happen in Switzerland about, migration. So I was collecting voices, So in these public discussions, when you tell young people do not go to Europe, people will always ask, if we don't go to Europe, what do we do? So my brother, his statements were, look, there is this saying that they say our great grandparents were farmers, our grandparents are farmers, our parents are farmers, and look at the situation where we are in. And to make matters worse, for made by SOS, for that back of the proper, even private school we cannot afford. Look at how life is here. So what do you expect me to do? €1 is equivalent of $50. I was like, whoa, okay, that makes sense. A euro is $50, and most of the people living in comfortable houses here have people out there sending them money. So we had to figure out what can we do here to be able to solve that. And this is where we talked about the agriculture. So when I talk about agriculture, my mother's complaint came. from a lot of different people that we were having these focus group discussions with in the North Bank. Everybody is complaining about an unprecedented change. Either it's about rainfalls getting missing or things getting kind of, changing that they don't understand it. So when I went to this Global Youth Summit, we had a discussion. Then that was the first time I'm learning about climate change, because the climate change I knew before was about the ozone layer depleting, and we are having the sun's ultraviolet radiation. I didn't know that we had a carbon problem back then that is altering the earth systems. So then, at that Global Youth Summit, I came in contact with the Sustainable Development Goals. So I read through the Sustainable Development Goals and its indicators. And I remember back in primary school, we used to have these MDGs. So they told me that these were the goals that have replaced the MDGs. So that document I read kind of made me feel like I am a citizen of the world. I'm a global citizen, and we have a common enemy, and we all have to work together towards this. So I never saw myself as someone. I felt like, okay, this is what we have to do to change the entire world by 2030. So at that summit, I really got the spirit and the boost. We were all allowed to draft on a project that we feel will bring change and create a change. And we are allowed to draft a project and submit to this organization called the Global Change Makers. So from there on, that's when I drafted the first ever project, which was called Green Up 10,000. And I got funding from that organization to implement this Green Up 10,000 upon my return to the Gambia. So when we returned to the Gambia, we opened a page called Green Up 10,000, but Facebook did not allow us to write Green Up 10,000. So we named it Green Up Gambia. But it was a project that I didn't want to reinvent the wheel. I called an organization that was the only organization working on climate at that time, which is Climate Watch the Gambia. So we implemented this together, and because of Facebook did not allow Green Up 10,000, we named it Green Up Gambia. That's how we became a household name later on after the successful implementation of the Green Up 10,000. So this is my journey towards the activism.
So Green Up Gambia, which, as you said, was meant to be Green Up at 10,000, but Facebook did not allow it. And you had this opportunity to go abroad and had your first exposure with the Sustainable Development Goals. For those of you who may not know, the Sustainable Development Goals, like Kemo said, traditionally what has been created to replace the Millennium Development Goals. And also these are sort of I think, Kemo, would you like to set a little bit light on that for our audience to understand? Because I don't want to be the one to really explain,
Yeah.
but speak a little bit
So the
about.
Sustainable Development Goals are pretty much, 17 goals that the world has set aside with target indicators, so that by 2030 we would be able to live in the first Sustainable Development Goal is that we'll be able to achieve no poverty. The second would be good health and well-being. The third would be, education. So it goes all the way to 17. And goal 13 is climate action. Goal 14 is life on land, and goal 15 is life below. Goal 14 is life below water, and goal 15 is life on land. So these goals, goal 17 is partnership for the goals, goal 12 is responsible consumption and production. So these are 17 goals that if every country abide by this, we will be able to achieve a sustainable world. So sustainable development itself is defined as that which provides the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generation to fend for themselves. So each of these goals have target indicators, and as a globe, as the United Nations, we are looking at how to work on these goals to create a just and prosperous world. So with these goals, anyone can look at what are every country can work by this. As a matter of fact, it can even replace the NDPs. We can use the Sustainable Development Goals as, for example, my campaign manifesto. I do not need to bring any other manifesto beside the SDGs, which is where the direction is the world is heading to. So essentially, these are plans set aside that we can follow suit. And there are also, ways that we can be able to get together with these goals as a human community. So this is why I loved it so much. It wasn't just individual, but a collective, goal for nations to follow suit, so that, nobody will be living in poverty by 2030. And the best thing about these goals is that there are targets to it, unlike the MDGs. A millennium is a period of 1,000 years. And how long will it take? Who will check what needs to be done by what? So this is one of the things why I love the Sustainable Development Goals as a pathway to put the world on a path of peace and prosperity.
And also, just to add on briefly to what you're talking about when it comes to the SDGs, for a very long time, growth has been mostly GDP growth for most economics around the world. The idea
Mhm.
of growing more and more wealth and productivity for our countries through GDP growth has, I mean, experts have discovered that this leaves a lot of people behind. Especially
Yeah.
in terms of the global north, they're the biggest contributors of what we now know is a lot of issues that has to do with climate, or a lot of what we now know is not a very healthy way of growing our society. So SDGs came out of that to ensure that we have a system that is much more comprehensive, that caters for future generations, but also the growth is not just productivity, it's not just more capital for our country, but it's one that caters for every segment of our society, including the importance of climate. And that also speaks to, because you mentioned a little bit about the National Development Plan. I just recently read the country partnership framework for the UN. I mean, not the UN, the World Bank Group that they established for most countries around the world. And part of what that does is to highlight just the importance of incorporating SDGs as part of the National Development Plan. And the Gambia, I think, has done a great job in terms of aligning our country, our national development plan together with the country partnership framework that the World Bank Group has established for the Gambia. I was reviewing it. Although there are still
Yeah.
significant gaps in terms of our vulnerability and fragility to shocks and different crises. And that's, I think, the importance of where your development plan comes into play in terms of what you want to do if government's given opportunity. But talk to us briefly about so far how that experience has been for Green Up Gambia since you started this work. What significant projects have you embarked on that you think are defining for your time since you started this work?
Well, most importantly, I would say that it's the awareness that we have raised across the Gambia. Since the inception of Green Up Gambia, we now have over 50 different environmental groups. Communities are now understanding that there is a changes to the earth systems and there's a way to adapt to these changes. Most importantly, farmers, because before, when we go down for community awareness raising, they will tell us, well, we this all this rains that is disappearing is because of people sinning. So the farmers had believed that the sins are now too much on earth, that alayala nema jiobutale. And I was like, but who is bringing these stories here? So we had to be able to kind of decolonize the mind and, really sensitize the people to understand that, well, the changes that are happening are changes that are man-made. Of course, they have little to do about it, to do with it, because this has to do with the big oil-rich nations. The climate change problem is just, us taking carbon in the form of solid and putting it in our engines, our planes, and our cars, and burning it into gas form, and which is concentrating in the atmosphere. So with this understanding, they have to know that, well, as a matter of fact, we are the ones, there's a changes that is global, but for us as a people, we can stop it by protecting what we already have, because they didn't understand that because of deforestation and desertification, what we call in Mandinka samaka charle. So at the end of the day, the rain is looking for the greens. So in Casamas region, there will be more rainfall. In fact, that forest is bringing rainfall to the entire Sahel region. But if you come to the North Bank, there is, desertification, just a fancy word for forest that is turning into, desert. So in the end, we cut down the jungle trees, the big trees that hold the integrity of the forest. Later on, we depend on the smaller trees. And after colonization as well, we also had this thing of growing cash crops. So people were cutting down the forest to make way for granite, maize, sesame, cotton, so this created a lot of problems. And with this land clearing, the green was disappearing, and that was affecting even our microclimate. So we had to incentivize the farmers that we cannot afford to leave the land like this, because in as much as the rain disappears, the soil also loses its value because there is nothing covering it. So even when we have rains, you will not be able to grow the crops that you can, simply because there's so much of the topsoil that's been washed off by wind and water action that ends up in the riverbed. So before, you will realize that 10 years ago, the harvest that you are getting now, you will not be getting that. And the rains 10 years ago is different from the rains now. It keeps changes. It gets more and more erratic as we go because of this climate problem. So it's important that you understand the problem so that, if climate is changing, food and agriculture must change too. So with this, you can give them adaptation mechanisms. So instead of farmers growing their granules, which they continue to grow, you can give them more information that if you take a handful of granite and a handful of cashew nut, which one is valued more? Granite will be sold at probably $10, and the cashew nut will be $50 or $100, sometimes $500 for cashew nut. So at the end of the day, you can grow in such a way that you can still continue to grow granules while you wait for your trees to mature. So that this will give you less labor, you will have less inputs like fertilizers and chemicals to put, and you will still get paid higher than that of the grant is giving you. So you are allowed to plant in an agroforestry way. Let's say every 5 or 7 meters, you put a cashew tree. So by the end of the 3 years, you would realize that now you are having more revenue with less effort that you're putting in, with less input that you're paying. So at the end of the day, there needs to be some adaptation mechanism. And this has been our focus to kind of really educate these farmers. So our trees, they are, of course, sorry, they are economic beneficent trees. So mostly we will give them cashew, but our primary aim was also to kind of restore the forest. I need something to drink.
Yes.
Our primary aim was to restore the forest, essentially, putting in the indigenous trees. But farmers do not really care about the indigenous trees. They need to feed their families. That is priority for them. So at that moment, we had to focus on raising this awareness, this understanding on climate change. And this is one thing that has been very impactful because we are seeing now that there is a proliferation of groups and movements across. There is, so much climate action in the Gambia that people now understand these unprecedented changes that is happening. So that is one of the measures of the success that we will see. And then we move into having summer go green campaigns. Omar Malmo will always say that this is to make tree planting sexy. So everybody sees planting of trees in summer. We all want to plant trees. And slowly you will realize that if every individual is planting one tree, over 8 years, that would be 8 trees multiplied by 2 million people. So you can understand that even on your birthdays alone, you can celebrate by planting a tree. So we try to create many avenues to get people to be engaged in these activities, whether it's one tree, one youth, one tree, one man, one tree. And with this, we also form collaborations. This is where the existence of the Gambia Environmental Alliance stemmed from, that we need to have an umbrella body for these organizations that are all growing and taking climate action seriously. And this is, some of the steps that we have tried to work on to ensure that really, climate action really takes place in the Gambia. And in terms of the projects that we have worked on, of course, that's a lot of different ones because at Green Up Gambia, we have been focused on always delivering shorter cycle projects. And this is something that Omar and I have always been against, that we don't want to be donor dependent. So mostly with these shorter cycle projects, what do we get? Let's say, for example, you have 50,000 US dollars. You're supposed to spend this in 12 months. And, after 12 months, the donors need to get a report. They need you to do as, how it's supposed to be. You cannot say, okay, we will extend this or we will buy machinery. It has to be spent the way it is. So I realized that after all these grants, after spending that for 12 months, you have the awareness raising, then you report back. It's difficult to maintain our staffs because people will have to go and find other jobs. Until then, we can apply for another grant. So we didn't want to continue like that. So this is what led to kind of creating, social enterprises that will continue to generate revenue as we go so that it can feed into our activities and power up our strategic plan. So that's why for 8 years we have been here, because this method needs to go. Because mostly in the Gambia, we will only have Ibrahim Sonko and Sons Foundation, and you realize that nobody is Muhammad Jah. It should be Muhammad Jah Foundation or Acrisel Foundation. These are the people who have resources to create foundation. But Ibrahim Sonko cannot go and create a foundation to go and look for donors. That's, that's the dependency. So with this, we have to figure out ways, creative ways, where we can get out from these donor-dependent projects to powering up a strategic plan that works in a light of creating change, meaningful change, even if it doesn't mean that we will buy equipment for the farmers, but we can empower them with ways and systems, with adaptation mechanisms, that they can really be able to work with the changing climate. So this has been, some of the significant, things that we have done at Green Up Gambia. And of course, recently as well, we have started to work on, technology. I think we acted as partners to the recently weather information systems that we have built for the Department of Water Resources, I think under the Ministry of Fisheries, with weather impact and the Global Center for Adaptation. And also, we've been doing some kind of evaluations for the ministries, looking at some of their planting sites, because we have the expertise and the people around to help, in crafting some of these things. And we have been participating as well in policy dialogue. That's why when I say I did not go to university, the only job I will be qualified for is presidency, because while my colleagues are in university learning, their degrees, where I have been at these hotel rooms with conferences, validation workshop, national poverty reduction strategy. So all I know is the documents, instead of sitting in the classroom and sitting at the real life policy table, negotiating with these people. So in the end, it's the only job I'm qualified for, basically. And I think that, just as a joke, I might be one of the cheapest presidents the country can afford. You don't have to pay me $500,000. My credentials are not that much. So you can even reduce it to 200,000, which is a huge salary, I would say. So that's not a bad idea. But just as a understanding of how national issues were of paramount importance, because we needed to streamline climate change into every sector of planning and development. And back then, the Gambia was really doing wonders across the globe. We have been to various climate change conferences, the UNFCCC, the UN Convention on Desertification, and as well as on biodiversity. So all of these were, avenues that we were engaged both at local, national, regional, and international level when it comes to climate policy discussions and negotiations. So this was a very huge learning point to be in that, multilateral environment, and, kind of seeing how things work in real time, and how these documents, like in the country, feed into the Paris Agreement, which is an agreement that even the Gambia was named as one of the only few countries living up to its promise of the Paris Agreement. So that was a national news, a global news, that a small country like Gambia is leading the way. So that has been because of the efforts that we are doing on the ground, holding the government accountable. In fact, the Gambia is one of the only countries that have a climate vision. So you can understand that we have been really working hand in glove with the government in terms of meeting our climate targets. So these are some of the engagements that the Green of Gambia has been up to.
And to you guys' credit too, because if you look at the SDGs as well, I think climate is, SDG 16. If I get that correctly, climate is the one area that,
Climate
yeah,
is 13, 13.
yes, excuse me,
16, 16 is peace, justice, and strong institutions.
Thank you for that correction. But climate is one area that Gambia has been performing incredibly well. If you look at our SDG performances, different factors, you go through it. Gambia is on the sub-region.
But not of recent. Not
Sorry
of
again.
recent. Recent, the Gambia has dropped from climate action tracker, from being the most Paris Agreement compatible country to, I don't know what number we are at now, simply because the Gambia continues to push for oil exploration. Also, the forest of the Gambia has turned from being a carbon sink to a source of emitting carbon. So let's not forget currently where we
Yes,
are
yes.
at. I mean, I don't want to get a bit,
No, not to
yeah,
mislead
I don't
our
want to get
audience.
into the emotional
That was
part
what I
of
was
that.
laying. I was actually laying down the premise to say that, to sort of recognize the level of advocacy you guys have been doing in partnership with government, that over the years, that has sort
Yeah,
of placed us as this ideal. Gambia has been exemplified in many platforms around the world as being an ideal country where people are
yeah,
working really hard. I've seen that. That is reported
Yeah,
several places. But we always
yeah,
there's always this backsliding in our context. And
definitely.
that largely has to do with exploitation of resources, and the idea of growth comes in different forms, and the danger mostly is climate. That is an
Yeah,
issue that we continue to face with. But I wanted us to spend some time to talk about the fact that part of your journey, you also went into public service through Cardiff Municipal Council. And that was one of, I think, the most controversial periods of your public life. We don't have a lot of time, so I don't want us to spend a lot of time into it. You did appear at the local government council and also talked
yeah.
about the pilot project, which the Cardiff Municipal Council instituted. So talk to us very briefly about that. How was that experience like for you? And also, what are some of the systemic barriers that we know that local government continue to experience in the Gambia? Because this is perhaps your first time you walk in public service in the Gambia or public office, right? And
For
right
100 days.
so let's get into that very briefly, and then we can get into the last bit, which is now your politics.
Okay, well, I think that, definitely, me, I'm really afraid of the Canning Municipal Council. That's why I only had to go to the commission. So if you want to know more details about that, you can always go back to look at the testimony that I've given to the local government commission. And by the way, I want to commend that, the local government councils, after not only Kanifi Municipal Concern, but looking at all the local governments, this has been one of the greatest wars on corruption. Really speaking, maybe people must have seen the thing that this is witch hunt, but I think it was very good step in the right direction to really set local councils intact. I mean, in Kaniping Municipal Council is not even the case, but when I look at Basse Area Council and I see people were loaning themselves state money, I was shocked. This was crazy. It was something that I didn't really expect that this would bring forward. But let me make a very huge controversial statement here so that I think you can also get some views, and which I stand by any given day, that this local government commission is my commission. I commissioned the local government commission. And I'll tell you how this was commissioned. So, in my 100 days of working at Carnifing Municipal Council, I've always understood that, like, for example, people always, they say you eat where you walk. This was a norm that I've always found there. And in my time at Canifing Municipal Council, I was trying to really help the Lord Mayor to be able to fix the problem of waste in the entire country. Before even the Lord Mayor came, I had been working with the Ministry of Environment, because I live just a stone throw. If you know SOS Children's Villages, it's like right next to the back of the dump site. So I could be in my room at the SOS Children's Villages and look at inside the dump site like this, looking at kids, cows, and things picking up. So it was just a stone throw away from my window. So when there is smoke, sometimes visibility is less than 1 meter. So this was something very important that we needed to change. And I commend the current administration of the Carnifing Municipal Council for helping to solve that problem. Although much is needed to be done for waste to be, really a problem of history in the Gambia, but there's still more to be done with that. But my focus was primarily the back of the dump site. And I realized that, in working there, sometimes you have to be a problem, because sometimes I was even threatened at that site. My life was potentially at risk because I was manning, where people were getting their livelihoods from. So at the end of the day, some of them even told me, Jang ngadol bade janne ngadol sasata. I was like, well, tell them that I'm anointed by the one true God. So this was my thing. But sometimes I have even caught one guy one time, who was a driver there at KMC, who brought some kind of voodoos there. So I was getting a little bit scared, but I still had to keep on that, momentum to say, hey, this is something we're going to do, and whatever finds us there, so be it. We don't care. Whatever you can do, just do it. But it was really difficult to work in the government because response was really low. When I send responses to the administration, coming from an international NGO, I'm used to professional working environments. So when I was in council, it was like council was just, it was not really up to standard. And this has been, a big problem for me to really get my points across. When I write documents, nobody will come after me. Nobody will even respond until at such a point that when I uncovered corruption there, I saw that, well, they tried to remove me. in the most unceremonious way. And in the end, I got angry. So why I said I sanctioned this local government commissions, there was a time that there has been this issue of corruption. And I do know that sometimes people like to favor people that they're in the same camp with. So I was not, really in favor with this um, uh, people who were working at the council at the time, the then deputy mayor, who said that he resigned because his mother passed away. So I was unhappy with the fact that the mayor had to back that up, because when people are corrupt, just name them. But the fact of the matter is that when I posted on Facebook that corruption is happening at Carnifing Municipal Council at the highest level, to my surprise, the next day or two, I saw that they called for a press conference at the Carnifing Municipal Council, and then Zainabu Martin was thrown under the bus. So for me, I was pissed, but she was not the only corrupt one. That they should have fished out every one of them, including the then deputy mayor, and put them. So with this press conference, it caught the attention of the state. So the state then orchestrated a commission. So therefore, I take all credit for this commission. It's not Barrett's local government commission. It's my local government commission.
I do want to ask you. I do want to ask you, and you've really in many instances why you talk about this KMC issue, avoided that
Yeah.
conversation. It is your. Tell me what do you think, and you don't have to answer this as well.
Yeah.
Do you think Mayor Talib Ahmed Bensouda is corrupt?
Well, I have never seen Mayor Talib Ahmed Bensouda in any sort of corruption whatsoever. So how would someone say that Mayor Talib Ahmed Bensouda is corrupt? Rather, what I have said is that he's the one harboring corruption in council. You see, if your guys are corrupt, you have to set an example with your own people. But back then, it's how would I say? They were in UDP, so you will protect your allies and your friends. So this is something that we have to remove in public service. When you are there, you have to stand for the interests of the Gambian people. So if your friends do wrong, set an example with them. So that was my only problem. The fact that only Senator Martin had to take the fall, that's not correct. And someone is resigning because his mother passed away. Come on, we cannot accept that. So this was something that he stood by, which for me, that was my main problem of this. And as well, what pained me as well was the fact that, I was a member of the committee and I had my powers back then, which I didn't need to be a staff. So if I'm a staff and I resign from being a staff and want to go back to the committee, why is it that I have to be stopped from getting into the committee? As a matter of fact, any day that I clarify this with Lord Mayor Bensouda, perhaps it will be the day that I will join the Unite Party. But without that clarification from him, I'm not going to be working with, because I need to understand what transpired there. Why wasn't I allowed to get back into the committee? And when I was getting into the committee, I was given an appointment letter. But in taking me out, nobody sent me any letter. Just that nobody informs me. I called the chairman. So that still pains me until today.
Well, if the mayor is listening or his people are listening, this is a very prominent
Let
young
us
person.
tell them. They need to let me know. They need to let me know why I wasn't allowed back in that
Yes,
committee to go and do what I do best.
that's what I'm about to say. Is they need to set it up. But most importantly, I think it's important for young people to sort out or to sit down and have a dialogue. And you're always open for that. And I'm sure Talib is more than open to that too. To
No,
basically,
I don't think they are open for that, because they know Kemo's problems. I'm known as Kemo problem in Carnifing Municipal. So if you want to have peace, you have to make sure Kemo comes. Then the justice will be violent, but definitely it will reach to a point where we can understand that this is for the greater good. Because usually, people will always attempt to kind of please people. And when I went to the public service, that's one of the things that I don't want to do. I'm not a people's pleaser at public service. I'm a nice person individually. I'll help people. I'm jovial. But, when it comes to the government work, man, I take that so seriously, to a point that, I even take my laptop to the dump site itself, entering data, making sure that, because at any given point in time, for the first time in my life, I felt like I'm contributing value to the lives of people. So when you are in public service, you need to understand that people, thousands of people are depending on you. So that's an honor. So if you cannot honor that, like I used to have this saying in council, if you are in council and you don't like what we are paying you, please leave. And because of my level of, Thomas Sankara says, in order to effect change, you have to have some level of madness. So sometimes with my madness, I'm sure even words will reach even the mayor, because if someone comes and complain, I'll tell you, this is what will happen. If you don't like it, you can even go to the mayor. So he himself will say, "You don't know how somebody else will tell me that." I'll be like, "I don't care how they say it. I say what I want to say. I'm not afraid of you or anyone else." So for me, I was there for him. Basically, I was his number one person. Everyone there, I came for his deliberate success. And the fact that they don't recognize this, it pissed me off beyond, doubts. Beyond, I was prepared to make sure that Mayor Bensouda becomes president because he was really willing to support and fix the dump site in our communities. That when you have to do that, everybody cannot like you. You have to be straightforward. You cannot have a smiling face everywhere. we need to pass those things. Otherwise, you cannot get things done.
And Kemo, and the point I was trying to drive at is the fact that I'd rather have you on my side than to be against you, because I know, and any serious person who listens to you know that you are a serious person. I don't care if you become I hope you become president, and I genuinely mean that. I hope that you become president. But knowing our country is the way things work in that.
Hopefully 2026, only a coalition can bring a change. I'm not willing to risk this change for anything. It says we need
Yes,
unity. Right
but
now, nobody can become a president except who the coalition says. So this coalition is a must, whether we like it or not. And believe me, if this coalition do not happen, let me send a warning out there to all of these politicians. We will not be going against Barrow. If you fail a coalition this time and President Barrow wins, we will be moving a motion to turn the Gambia to a monarch and make President Barrow king. And I'll be coming after all of these people, these opposition leaders, one by one. The war will be against them because they will be the people who denied the Gambian people a chance at change when they saw it, either because of whatsoever reason. So this coalition, people are still debating. I can guarantee you the coalition will happen, or else Kemo will become your number one enemy. We'll be warring the oppositions instead of the incumbent. So this coalition, don't even risk it. Me, Kemo, this coalition is stopping my candidacy. And I'm with the firm belief that a coalition will happen, whether we like it or not. So Kemo running is not really good for the Gambia. That is really, really, really a point at which we know that the Gambia is really divided. I mean, sex. Can you even imagine? We're talking about African unity, African integration. If Sonko and Jamai split any given day, I'll give up on African unity. As a small nation, we cannot come together. When are we going to come together as the African continent? When are we going to have free borders and free movements of people? And every one of us claim to be representing the interests of the country and the interests of the people. So now that's what has to end. If there is no coalition, nobody has the interests of the Gambia at heart. And that is where we will settle. We will not even go into negotiations. So let them prepare to either have enemies amongst us or come together that we can salvage this country. Those are the two options here. So don't 2026, I'm not a candidate. Maybe 2031, definitely yes. At least having a coalition this time will open up the ground for a multi-party contest so that we can have, the Green Party versus the Unite Party versus all other parties, running in a multi-party contest after leveling our democracy. The promise of the 2016 coalition must be met this time around in 2026. We are taking no options off the table, and I hope the opposition leaders are listening. If you want me to start protesting against you, don't form this coalition. Barrow will be free from Westfield. Protest will be at their gates.
but Kemo, and I like your optimism. I'm not very optimistic. I hope that they're listening to you, because I think it's incredibly important for
Yeah.
some partnership to be built if they want to effect any meaningful change. Because at the end of the day, Borough holds the bigger power in this stage right now. But
Yeah.
you also have, and this is my second to last question, you have an ongoing case with the government of the Gambia, with the state,
Yeah.
not the government of the Gambia, with the state. And as we know,
Yeah.
as of today, that case has not been dropped. And what do you anticipate to come out of that? Because that's another issue too. Is I just cannot not bring that issue up.
Okay, well, the reality of the matter is that, look, perhaps I'm the first person in the history of the country to be on two bails. So that's the record I've broke. I mean, like, I am on a case with the state, but I don't think it's a case. I think the state just do not want us out on the streets, so they feel like they can kind of threaten us with the instruments that they have at hand. So if everything that is within the confines of a courtroom, that's how justice is decided, then we should know that rather it's not really justice. So the courts do not determine what justice is. So, and this is where the radical Kemo comes into play. For the sake of justice, either the law have to change, but it's your conscience that decides this. So, as Bob Marley says, we've got a mind of our own. So go to hell if what you're thinking is not right. Majorities do not determine what is right or wrong. Your conscience does. And as human beings, we have to die with that. So if the case feels like they are going to prosecute us for holding a press conference, I mean, I was walking to Banjul, my first arrest. I was
Yes, sir.
walking to Banjul on the street as a private citizen, and then I got arrested. My human rights were violated. I was at the police station. Police were taking photos of us sitting on the floor, and I'm like, but what is this? If I'm a criminal, take a mugshot. You cannot tell me to sit on the floor and you come and take a photo of me. Is that to humiliate me or what? So that lack of professionalism. Even one of the police was telling me, remove your belt. I told him, yeah, but can I have at least a shoelace or something because my trousers will fall. It's like, yeah, your trousers will fall. It's mine that was supposed to be fastened. So I looked at him and told him, you're not wearing this uniform. I would have given you a nasty slap. But but because you're wearing the uniform, I'm obliged to, make sure that I keep my cool. I'm representing a lot of people here. You're very lucky. But in essence, it felt like to me like we are not a serious country. When I look at how things were operating, in this country, how things go. And then the second arrest was when I saw, PIUs in an office removing a civilian, the people's watchman, the auditor general. And I'm like, but are we back to dictatorship? So for me, I felt like, yeah, we are back to dictatorship where people cannot. But I was like, people voted in Gambia for us to have this freedom. That's why you see Kemo protesting, because in the old Gambia, we did not have this. It is the Gambian people that gave us this gift. So who is this person to come and take it out? So that day, I was really, really disheartened to see that a sitting auditor general is forcefully removed for simply, refusing a cabinet position. So Momodu Sise's patriotism calls for us as a citizenry to stand with him. And if I have to even go to jail for that, no problem. So be it. Let me face my fate with that. But the reality of the matter is that injustice only becomes injustice because people choose to stand and watch. So when injustice becomes law, resistance is a duty. And this is why we keep on resisting. And until today, like I said in my State of the Nation address, no court bail, no police summon, not even the walls of Mile 2 prison will silence our pursuit for justice.
Kemo, thank you so much for being here, for having a conversation with me. But I'm not going to leave you without asking you, amidst all of this adversity that you continue to face, you are an optimist, you are a hopeful person, you are a strong person that represents resilience in several means and ways. What is your call for hope for the country?
Well, I think that in my call for hope would be that, in this country here, we all love each other. This goes down from the incumbent, the ruling party, all the way down to the opposition. You all know that we know each other here. Just yesterday, I was looking at the reflections of Dr. Ismaila Sise at one of the press conferences. We are, as a people, we can only see the truth and we can recognize the truth. We must stand with the truth and ensure that we give Gambia back her true self. If the president is listening, he needs to understand that he owes the Gambian people a sacred bond, a trust. It is not out of the constitution, but out of the morality, ensuring that he gives the Gambia back. He says that "Mba safela le nga sign nga seal ko hani mansa do nata at a tambila two tamla." That was the promise he gave to the Gambian people. Whether under the coalition or not, he has to abide by that promise. And if he abides by that promise, he would become a leader, a statesman in this country. He would be well respected if he steps down from this power, and that will allow the Gambia. You cannot say the whole NPP. There is nobody to lead lead the NPP, and the president says that he's not doing this for the sake of the Gambia. He's doing this for the sake of his young party. So let them not put their parties above the Gambia. That is one of the things that they need to know. To the opposition parties, we know that they all have hearts for the Gambia. They all want the Gambia to progress. But the reality of the matter is that them as an individual single-handedly cannot boost a sitting government. So they have to be able to work together. People cannot work together. We cannot even constitute a government in waiting. Even when there is a coalition, it is not done the right way. Like the 2016 coalition was no more shortly after people went to power. Why is it that we always change our words when the time comes for us to act most? So this is a message that we need to reflect upon as a people, that we are not sleeping. Everybody sees the truth and they all know the truth deep in their hearts. So whatever amount of words you sugarcoat it, it cannot change it. So they just must listen to these words that speak and give the people what they want. We can allow a multi-party in the Gambia, provided that the president has to resign and ensure that he gives the Gambia back her true self. But politically, that will be the most impossible thing to do. But this also will save him a lot of trouble in the future because I do not know what is about to come. Like I always write on my Facebook, this is the political Armageddon. Everybody's sincerity will be tested, and this judgment will pass no one. So, for him to pass his judgment, it is right that the spirit of the land speaks to him now that he must resign and give the Gambia back her true self. Because if he doesn't, he shall be judged, and so shall all his opponents and everyone who claims to have the interests of the country at heart. So let's work together in unison and harmony to lead us to the progress that we all desire.
Thank you so much, Kemo, for that profoundly moving statement to everybody in the Gambia, including the president of the Gambia. If you're listening, Kemo just delivered a very poignant message. And I would like, at this point, really thank you for being here, for talking to me on a very short notice at that. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate the conversation. And I wish you all of the best in the work that you do. And I hope that the Gambia government, most importantly, drop those charges against you, because I am an advocate of free speech. I am an advocate for free assembly of Gambians. And I think we must move away from the idea of arresting people based on silly national security issues. That's not something that in 2025 we should be talking about. I wish you all of the best, Kemo, in the work that you're doing in the Gambia. It's been an honor talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me. Really nice catching up with you.
Thank you, brother. Have a wonderful day.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you all to our audience who are here with us, who are still around while this conversation ongoing. Please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel, the Dialectic Space Podcast. We're also on TikTok, we're on Instagram, and obviously we're on Facebook as well. This marks the end of our week's episode of the Dialectic Space Podcast, and we'll come back again on Tuesday with the presidential candidate for Golden Era Party, Sekou Saho. I'm going to be talking to him on Tuesday. And I have a couple of other people that I'll be talking to for the rest of next week as well. So continue the interactions. Send me your recommendations of people that you want me to talk to. But also, if you're an individual that you hold certain knowledge about certain things happening or certain areas of professionalism, feel free to reach out to me at any time. I'll wrap this by asking those of you who are here within the Washington area to let you know that the Seattle Gambia football team is holding a gala dinner today here in Linwood, and you can go ahead and support what the community is doing with your families as well. But I really appreciate